Mentors of Middle-earth are paramount in offering wisdom and the best course of action. However, a good mentor is hard to come by. So join Elise and I as we discuss why Melian, Galadriel, and Gandalf are iconic counselors in Middle-earth. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to the White City Podcast. And I have a new guest with me, Elise. And
Hi.
um, teaching with magic is this still your thing that you're doing?
Yes.
Okay. Yep.
To a degree, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Um, it's yeah, unfortunately teaching with magic has kind of been put a little on the back burner. I've got some I'm working towards Orton Gillingham certification. It's a special certification for reading teachers and teaching reading. So, I could talk a little bit about that because it does relate to Tolkien a little bit. But so unfortunately, the blogging part has been put on hold for a bit while I work on that. But I'm still here. I'm still doing some things with teaching with magic. And of course, I'm always happy to talk about teaching and how it relates to the world of Tolkien.
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah. So before we get into like more of the mentor teacher aspects of Middle Earth,
Mhm.
what got you into Lord of the Rings, Elise?
I have always been a big fantasy person. You could often find me in the folklore fantasy section of the library. I have a necklace with 398.2. That's the Dewey Decimal System number for the fantasy folklore section. So, there was a time, it was 2011, and Lord of the Rings was coming out, and my family was familiar with the story, but they weren't massive like geeks like I was. So for a movie night one night, my dad put on the Bakshi film for Lord of the Rings and the Rankin and Bass Hobbit because he was interested in the story and how it went. He was a bit disappointed that the Bakshi film stopped right at the end of Two Towers. He's like, "Where's the rest of the movie? Where did it go?" So from there, um, I would constantly checking out fantasy books at the library. I've got my favorite illustrated copy of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I was constantly checking that out. So I became a scholar, as it were, of the Inklings and Lewis and Tolkien after I completed my graduate degree. And I started taking classes at Signum University, and I started seeing ways that fantasy, language, teaching all kind of merged together. And so while my professional certification, my professional degree is in teaching, um, language literature is my it's my passion. And so they're both my passion, really. So I'm working on finding ways to bring the two together, and that's what I do in teaching with magic. I talk to teachers. I look at teachers in fantasy, so the mentor figures in whether it's Tolkien, Lewis, whether it's real teachers, whether it's fictional teachers. I look at how they teach and the methods that they use to inspire and teach in their fantasy worlds. And I talk to real teachers about how they use fantasy in their own classrooms, whether it's an English teacher in a high school classroom, a college math teacher. I've talked to Christine Larson, who talks about science and math in fantasy and how she uses fantasy to teach real world concepts in world building. So that's what I do, and so that's how I work to bring those concepts together, and it's really interesting to look and see how fantasy and real life kind of mirror each other. Whether you're a teacher, a mentor figure in the real world, and you're using fantasy content, what are those underlying themes that are common throughout education and teaching?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah. Um, I've I've always kind of thought of like mentors in Middle Earth as like, as we kind of communicating about like you were saying about Gandalf being a very iconic, you know, very urging everybody on, I guess.
Exactly.
So, but yeah, so what, maybe you had already kind of touched on this, but like, what do you see as like kind of the importance of teaching, I guess, and maybe how that looks in Middle Earth in general?
It's funny because I didn't even know once upon a time ago when I first started this, I didn't know that Tolkien was a teacher himself. I knew he was the writer. I thought that was like what he did. I didn't realize that he was a professor of language in, in Oxford University, and that he and Lewis were both teachers of English language. They were teachers of, and they almost created the curriculum for English language because that was lacking at Oxford at the time. It was pretty heavy on the classics, and that's where the Lewis got a lot of his inspiration from, was from Greek and Roman texts and mythologies, whereas Tolkien was more interested in Anglo-Saxon, in Norse, and the history of the English language. And so I kind of see a lot of how teaching and mentorship works with Gandalf and with a lot of the Istari in Middle Earth, whether it's, and also in some cases the Valar. I'm mostly focused on the Istari because they're a bit more reflective of the Campbell mentor figure. So Campbell's theory, it's almost like it's kind of, it's pretty obvious. Like if you've watched Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi, he's the hooded figure, he's the mentor, he's the one who says, "Go and save the world, Luke." And so there's, in the Campbellian cycle, it's like, all right, you got the hero, you got the hero's journey, you got the mentor, you've got the goddess. Like you can find that in almost every story. It's not hard to look for. But I love how Tolkien takes different examples of mentorship and teaches us in a way to how to be a teacher through, not only through Gandalf, but also in some ways through Saruman and Radagast. So I love the line in Unfinished Tales where um, Tolkien explains the whole point of the Istari is so that they urge the men and elves to go out, and I'm paraphrasing here, but they're supposed to urge men and elves and guide them to defeating Sauron. They're not the ones who are supposed to defeat Sauron. And they're supposed to guide them, the men and elves, to work together and to become unified. Kind of mad at the dwarf slight because, dwarves really should be included in there. Gimli, you're my guy. But the whole point is that Middle Earth is supposed to come together. And you look at Saruman, and he's known as Saruman the Wise. He is learned. It's like he knows his craft. He knows how to do magic, and he knows how to do magic well. And he's the leader of the five. He's known for being book smart. So my mom likes to say that there's all different kinds of smart. There's book smart, there's people smart, some people have more one or the other. It's a bit a little motherly wisdom there. So Saruman figures out how over time I think he gets pulled in, not just because of what happens with the Palantir, but he also kind of gets clouded by what the lore says. It's what the book says and what the books say and what the lore says. And so this is where the ring is going to be, and this is how things need to be. Whereas Gandalf is a wanderer. He's a people person. He goes out and he talks to people. He talks to Theoden. He talks to everybody. He talks to Theoden's ancestors. He talks to elves. He talks to men. He talks to different communities of men to try and bring everybody together. It's in that he builds his wisdom. And he also doesn't, as frustrated as he gets sometimes, he doesn't shove information down people's throats and shake them. I mean, other than Peregrine Took, unfortunately, he doesn't shake them by the shoulders and say, come on, you got to get this done. We got to do this. Because this is a dire situation, what's going on in the Third Age. I mean, they're up against the clock. They're, they have someone to defeat. And Gandalf knows that if Middle Earth doesn't come together, it's not going to work. Okay, if even in the Battle of the Last Alliance, men and elves had to work together in order to defeat Sauron the first time. So what does he do is he cultivates relationships. He cultivates people. He talks, even in The Hobbit, he knows that if Erebor is not set up to defend the North, then not only is Sauron going to have more allies, but there's also not going to be anyone to defend the northern border when the time comes. So even if we can't see it right away, even if Thorin can't see it right away, the men of Lake Town, they can't see it right away, he has that foresight. He has that wisdom to say, all right, here's what's going to happen. I have to plant these seeds now so that the future is taken care of. You see this a lot in Shadow of the Past. He has the lore. He does what I would call the info dump. Like, he's telling you everything that's been happening in late Second Age, Third Age, that Frodo needs to know. Like, the poor guy probably has a big headache after all of that. And Frodo's overwhelmed and he's stuck. He says, he's like, oh gosh, this guy Gollum, he ruined everything for me. He's ruined everything. And he has this moment of, I'm so angry about this. I wish this is never going to happen. Bilbo should have done this. And Gandalf says, hold on. Before you get truly angry and make such a damning statement, think some more about this. Don't just think about your feelings about Gollum. Think about the whole picture and the fact that you are just a small little hobbit and that you don't have the wherewithal to decide if someone should live or die. Because those who think that of who should live or die, those are the ones who end up becoming overwhelmed with power or becoming drunk with power, like Saruman, like our friend Denethor, like almost like Theoden. Like, Theoden almost gets there. He's so overwhelmed by grief that he almost thinks, all right, if I just step back, I won't have to deal with this. But then Gandalf comes in, he says, nope, you have to face this. This is something we have to do. So he plants these seeds, but he gives room for Frodo, for Theoden, for Aragorn, for everyone to make their own decisions and do the right thing, whatever that ends up being. And that's why he succeeds, because he develops these relationships across Middle-earth, not because he's buried in the books. And he says, well, I'm the sage on the stage, and so I know what's best. I know what everybody needs. So you should listen to what I have to say. That's not Gandalf. You could tell I've thought a lot about this, so I tend to go on. Please stop me if I go on too long.
Like, keep going. I was just listening. That's fine. No, so like, yeah, yeah, it's a good point about like all the Istari being, having their role in, uniting everybody against Sauron and not actually like going head to head with Sauron themselves. And yeah, and like something with Saruman, I guess, that I thought about is, what's the example? I don't know. Maybe he's not a good example of a bad mentor, but like, I mean,
I think he's more of in my opinion, he's more of the example of someone who just gets so lost in the nitty gritty. So whether it's, the technician who never leaves the lab, or the person who's always 100% got their nose buried in a book, rather than having a conversation, rather than coming to a council, for example, like the Council of Elrond. That's the moment where they all share information. That's the moment where all of the peoples of Middle Earth say, here's what we need to do. So while someone can be a good scholar and someone, not every scholar is meant to be a teacher, and not every uh and not every like old wizard in a cloak is meant to be a mentor figure. You have your good mentors, and you have your not so good mentors, or you think about their purpose. I mean, in some ways, Faramir is a mentor. In some, like, if you think about the interaction that he has with Frodo in Ithilien, he could be considered, he's not like a wizard in a gray cloak, but he still imparts this wisdom of, here's what we're doing right now. Also, think about how, I mean, that scene where he talks about the Haraj soldier, and he's like, and he says, is his life worth any less because he's on the quote unquote bad side? Think about, oh no, I'm sorry, I'm movie quoting. That's not book quoting. That's Sam starts thinking about, why is his life worth any less? Yeah, sorry, I just movie and book conflated. But he still has these moments of, here's what's going on now, and here's the ideal that I got from Numenor that I want to live up to. And there's different ways to be a mentor, but if you keep yourself trapped in the ivory tower, as it were, like academics talk about the ivory tower all the time. Like, it's the people who make the big decisions, but they're not necessarily always grounded in what's going on in reality or inviting other people into the conversation. So in teaching, I try to be more of a facilitator. Sometimes I have to be the lecturer and say, here is the content, and here is what you have to learn, and here's what happened in 1495 or whatever I'm teaching at the moment. But I'd rather have my students talk to each other and draw their own conclusions. And how do I get them to do that? So whether it's with talking points, or I prep them with a reading, or I give them a question to debate. I have students whose language needs are, they have a lot of ideas, but expressing them is really difficult because of their language needs. So I give them prompts, or I give them sentence starters, so that they're not thinking about how to preface what they're saying. They know, like, oh, I can look at this worksheet and I can use that to frame my question or frame my response, so that they're doing the work and they're coming to their own conclusions. And I'm not always because I'm human. I might be wrong. And if you can admit you're wrong, you're already halfway there to being a good teacher. And I think that's part of the problem with both Denethor and Saruman, is that they have a hard time admitting when they're wrong and when things are going wrong. They're like, nope, there's only one way to do it. We have to do it this way. We have to defend Gondor this way. Or I have to face Sauron this way by becoming Saruman of many colors. And we have to, fortify Isengard. Humility, I think, is the word. Having a sense of humility and saying, I don't have all the answers, but we can work together to get there. I might have some information. We know Gandalf doesn't, he knows his stuff, our friend Gandalf. He knows his poetry, he knows his history, but he also knows that sometimes he needs to step back and let the hobbits or the dwarves or the men it's so funny to read The Lord of the Rings with kids and to read The Hobbit with kids, because they get so mad at Gandalf, especially in The Hobbit when he disappears. Like, the look of outrage on some of my students' faces when Gandalf disappeared for the first time in The Hobbit, like, and they're looking around going, wait a second, where did Gandalf go? We're about to face some trolls. This would be a really good time for Gandalf to come in to help us out here. And, it's just really, they're like, all right, Gandalf's gone again. They get to Mirkwood, and Gandalf says, all right, I gotta go. I have some other things to do. My students are like, what? Okay, then. Gandalf's gone again. Where does he keep going? And I'm just like, well, I could tell you, but that might be a bit spoilery. I'd be spoiling things for you. But it took a while, but then I had a student who's, and this is how I kind of got on the Gandalf train, as it were. I had a student who said, your teacher's not going to give you the answers to the test. Just like Gandalf is not going to give the everybody the answers to what they need, to what needs to be done. Oh, the scene when he runs out to the Pelennor and he drives back the Nazgul with his staff with light. Some of my students were going, well, wait a second, why didn't he do that before? Why hasn't he been doing that the entire time? And these are students who have grown up a bit on Harry Potter or on Marvel, who know, like, you've got a magic power, you've got it all the time, you've been developing all the time. What they don't understand about Gandalf is that he has limits to his magic, and Tolkien doesn't always communicate, like, he doesn't spell that out in the same way that Lewis might, or like Marvel might. He has these limits, and it's so subtle, and it's buried in the appendices, and you kind of have to discover it as you're reading. But they're like, well, he could have been doing that the entire time. He could have zapped the Nazgul a long time ago, and poor Frodo wouldn't have gotten stabbed on Weathertop. And I'm just sitting back going, really? You think so, children? Tell me more. And that's how one of my students said, no, he can't do that. He has limits. He has to guide everybody else to do it. It's not his job to save the world. It's everybody else's job to save the world. It's his job to help them do it. So that was, it's so fun. It's so fun watching kids come to that conclusion.
Yeah. I mean, he does fight the Nazgul on Weathertop and is able to,
He
kind
can
of
do it.
overcome them in one instance. But yeah. Um. So with like something that comes to my mind is like um teaching by example.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I was thinking about it. I kind of thought of like Aragorn
Yeah.
in a
Yeah.
sense.
He's a hands-on kind of guy.
Yeah.
Um, it's also I think with Aragorn, he's still figuring things out on his own as well. So he's with, at least with the hobbits, like, this is the first time they're going into the wild, and so he definitely leads by example. And I love the scene where he shares the story of the tale of Tinuviel for the first time with the hobbits, because that's their first real foray into history, because before they were kind of getting the abridged version from Bilbo. You've got Gil-galad was an elven king, of him the harper sadly sang, and then Sam recites it, but he doesn't necessarily understand it. He doesn't understand how that poem fits in the greater narrative. He just thinks it's a pretty poem about elves. But Aragorn plants that seed in that textual ruin in that moment by saying, not only here's the tale of Tinuviel, this is the tale of my ancestors, and this is how it fits in with the greater narrative. But he doesn't spell it out for the hobbits. They have to come to that conclusion over time. And then you get this reflection of that moment in the two, I think it's in the Two Towers, where Sam says, oh, we're a part of this is the same tale still. We are seeing how this whole story is playing out. And we are seeing how the story is playing out. So I love to think about the Lord of the Rings as almost a letter from Tolkien to Christopher, saying, here's my story. This is the story that I've been telling you all along, and we're a part of the same tale still. I have to pause for a second because my son has just gotten up out of bed and has turned on his light. Just give me 1 second. I will be right back.
Yep.
And we're back. Okay. Where was I?
We're talking about Aragorn.
Aragorn, yes. Aragorn plants the seeds for us and for Sam as well as Frodo, to learn the story of Middle Earth. And I think that's particularly why Sam is the keeper of the Book of Westmarch, of the Red Book of Westmarch, because he starts out as a little hobbit child who loves stories of fairy and elves, but then over time comes to understand how the story grows and how the story has developed. And he's the one who has to finish it before before he can go to Valinor. And I think both Bilbo and Aragorn help to plant that seed in him to be the keeper of the story, just as Tolkien plants that seed in Christopher. That's my working theory. Patent pending.
Okay. Yeah. No. No. Yeah. No, that's actually a good point with Christopher Tolkien. Yeah. That's an interesting thought of it being passed down that way. And you kind of touched on this too, I guess, that like the story in general um is kind of relates to our world, and so we can kind of learn things from Lord of the Rings. I don't know, maybe all stories are supposed to be that way. And not just Lord of the
Yeah.
Rings, but that's yeah.
Yeah, because we're a community, or we're meant to be a community of people, and the way we pass down our history is through our stories. Once upon a time ago, to use the phrase, we sat around the fire and we told stories. So I'm a reading teacher by trade, and reading, it's really interesting how much stock people put in the printed word, even though it's such a relatively new invention. So I could go on a soapbox about how um, how teaching reading is actually against what our brains are naturally supposed to do. I'll make sure I don't go too far up on that soapbox, but it does relate to Tolkien, I promise. So our brains are wired for language, whether that it's wired for speech. So it's wired to listen and it's wired to speak. It's not necessarily wired to read, at least not naturally. We can read because we train our brains to read, and we have our brain pathways develop over time as we're taught how to read, to link speech with the printed word, and then how it relates to meaning. But that's not a natural, reading isn't a natural process in our brains. It's something that we created with the printing press. And it's also something that wasn't accessible to everyone. For a while, it was only accessible to the learned gentry. It was only accessible to people who could afford an education. But nowadays, we tend to put stock in and say, well, if you aren't able to read, then you're not intelligent. I have students who come up to me every day and say, Miss, I'm stupid because I can't read. You're not stupid because you're not stupid. Your brain is not wired to read. That's not how your brain works. It's something we have to teach your brain how to do. And some brains have a harder time with it than others. So I mostly teach students who have dyslexia. So something in their brain makes it a lot harder for them to recognize printed word and to recognize written language. So they can read, but it takes them a lot longer to learn how to do it, and you have to teach them a very specific way. And fun fact, Tolkien as a language professor, the way he writes language and the way he teaches language in Anglo-Saxon, very rooted in how I, as a reading teacher, teach reading to students. I have to start with Anglo-Saxon. I have to start with Old English pieces because that's the root of common English words. And so by looking at the pieces of words, we can build sounds into words, into sentences, into paragraphs. That's a very dialed down version of how teaching reading works. But it's, where was I going with that? I was going somewhere with that, I'm sure.
Lord of the Rings.
Somewhere in Lord of the Rings. So Tolkien creates a language, and he thinks about the sounds, he thinks about the letters, and he thinks about how those words are presented in writing systems, whether it's the Tengwar or a Kirthangerthas. He has symbols that represent those sounds. And how they are built links to how we've built the English language over time. And the English language came from, it's got a sprinkle of Latin here, it's got a little bit of Germanic over here, a tiny bit of Greek over here, and thanks to the Norman Conquest, we got a little bit of French in there too. What the heck? Let's just throw some French in there. So he thinks about what if we have this language where, French, we don't know those people. From what I understand, he did not have a good relationship with French. The way he talks about language and the way he discovered these languages was through stories. So that was through Beowulf, that was through the Kalevala, that was through all these stories that he loved. So he kind of does kind of a backwards approach to what we think about teaching reading and language now, where he reads the story first, and then as a philologist pieces the missing parts of that language together, because manuscripts are torn up. There are pieces missing. A mouse nibbled on it here, or a fire burned that corner over there, and he can understand what a certain word might mean based on a modern connotation of it, but it's still a bit of guesswork, and he has to do it through that story and through that manuscript. So the way I teach reading, I have to start from the ground up. But he has a story. He's heard that story. He loves that story. He loves the story of Beowulf. You got a dragon, you've got a monster you got to slay. You've got this brave hero who, in the face of adversity, has to save the day. But where did that come from? It came from a community. It came from a people. It came from someone with a history. And then he thinks, okay, I can do that too. So he builds a community, who builds a language, who builds gods, who builds Valar, Morgoth, your big baddie. Then you've got your people baddies. You've got your friend Sauron. And then over time, you have a whole history and entire community and different communities of people and different histories constructed. So we as people are communities, and we build our communities through stories around the fire. And we build our histories through language. And so in order to have a language, you have to have a people. In order to have a people, you have to have a common language.
Very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting what you're saying about not naturally reading isn't like something that's natural for the brain. That's interesting. Because I wouldn't have thought about that. So I guess,
and not a lot of people do. Not a lot of people do. It's a lot of people think like, oh, a lot of people, because you don't remember how you're taught how to read when you're an adult. When you're a kid, you're in it and you're learning about it. And it also depends on how you're taught to read, because over time we've gone through these cycles of let's do it this way and then let's do it this way. So you could have had like, can you tell me the difference between a noun and a verb? Probably. Can you tell me why? So here's an example. Why is letter Y a vowel? Do you know why letter Y is a vowel? And when is it a vowel?
sometimes why?
Sometimes Y. You remember that rhyme, you know, A, E, I, O, U, and sometimes Y. But when's the sometimes? We don't always remember what that is. We've gotten to
Yeah.
the point as adults where we look at a text, we are reading a paragraph, we can read the paragraph, we made a story out of the paragraph. But when you're little and you've never learned that before, you have to learn those rules so that if you encounter the word baby or puppy for the first time, how do you know that Y at the end says E? It says E because it's at the end of a two-syllable word. So that's one of the instances when Y is a vowel. It's also a vowel way at the end of a one-syllable word where it says the I sound, like spy or sly. So those and we try not to call them rules, we call them generalizations because sometimes that's true, sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the English language likes to throw in throw in a doozy on us once in a while. But with those generalizations, we're able to craft words and we're able to teach those generalizations so that eventually they become rote in our brains. We don't have to think about that spelling anymore, or we can play with it as like I've noticed there are a lot of names that have been changed. Like names are really funky because they don't always follow the rules. They break the rules all the time. Like a lot of names out there have a lot of Y's in them. For example, like Paxton or Braden. There's extra E's or extra Y's in there. So sometimes that breaks the rules. But that's what Tolkien does when you look at the appendices. You have that. You have the graph with the Kirthangathas that says here are the sounds that are associated with these letters. That these sounds are represented by these letters, and these here's when to say Kalas Galathon, that DH says Galathon, like it has a specific sound associated with it because that's not a sound we have in English. So if you look at the appendices, you see how he says explicitly, here's what the vowel sounds say, here's what consonants say in Sindar and Quenya, and then this is how it's been built to I can't remember how deeply he goes into grammar. I don't think he goes into like parts of speech or anything like that, but he does tell you that he does tell you specific ways to pronounce your vowels and when to use them and when it's appropriate to speak in Sindarin or to speak in Quenya. But first, you get the story. First, you get the story in the Silmarillion proper, and in the Lord of the Rings and the Silmarillion proper. Then you get the appendices, so you can flip back and forth. So you start to notice the pattern after a while, and then you go to the appendices. You go, okay, now I understand where that came from, and you know that this is a translation, so there may be some inconsistencies or there may be some differences. And then you check on and then you look at them later. And then Tolkien sometimes says, well, this is how it's done in this case, or this is how it was written in this particular time, but we don't do that anymore. And if there are even parts that in the story where he says, it is told in this story, but we'll get into that later, or this isn't told in this particular part. He allows for space and for room to grow, which as language does, as stories do.
Yeah. So maybe a closing thought is what do I guess the characters who are being taught like in Middle Earth or maybe just like in general too, like what's their response or how are they um I don't know how to put the question well, but like I maybe the expectation is not a right word, but like kind of expectation for like students in response to like mentorship or teaching, I guess. Um do you have an idea for that?
I mean, every teacher, I think, has their hopes for their students and what they want them to come away with. I know there are times where I'm just kind of rubbing my eyes like Gandalf does with Pippin. I'm just going, God, I just wish, like this is the thing that I want you to get, and why don't you get it? But with that mentorship, the responsibility becomes, this is what I have to teach you. Now it's in your hands to do with what you will. And the moment I'm thinking of Elrond and Aragorn, especially in the tale of Aragorn and Arwen. Elrond had very specific expectations for Aragorn. He says, you can't marry Arwen until you have come into your kingdom, and you have done this task. And Aragorn does know that this is what he has to do, and he has this awesome responsibility. But he also takes the kingship to his own, and he says, this is how I understand how to be a good king. And that is going into the wild and talking and with, becoming Thorongil and becoming Strider. I like to think that I don't have a lot of textual evidence for this, but I like to think that he learns how to become one of the people to become a good king, because that's what his forefathers kind of lost over time, especially in Gondor. And even in Numenor, they forgot how to be humble, and they forgot how to be human, really. They wanted to be more than human. They started counting, their ancestry and their heralds dearer than their sons. So they lost perspective on what was important and to being human. And the Numenorians forgot that just because they can't go to Valinor doesn't mean that they don't have something to offer and something beautiful to be. So Aragorn, even though it breaks his heart to have to leave Arwen for a time, Elrond says, this is your task and this is what you have to do. Aragorn says, okay, but I'm going to do it my way. And I'm going to do it the way that I think it needs to be done. And I'm going to continue learning how to do it along the way. Like he has doubts that Aragorn has doubts that what he's doing is the right thing. And how he's like, he questions himself at every turn, as a good leader should. You're not supposed to, I don't think anyone is supposed to have all the answers. See, Gandalf doesn't have all the answers. He knows he's got to go do some research in Minas Tirith for a little bit, or he has to go consult with Radagast, or he has to go consult with another source, wherever that might be. And as Gandalf says, don't Frodo is not supposed to, don't think you have all the answers, Frodo. Don't think that you know what's best for another person until you've learned everything about them, and you've learned to see through, and you've seen through their eyes. So I think every good teacher should ask the information that they have and help the student understand their responsibility of charting their own path and doing with that information what they will. Because you don't want carbon copies of yourself, and I think that's kind of where a lot of people, Radagast to some degree, but mostly Saruman and Denethor, I think, lose the way and think, I have to do it my way. This is the only way to do it. And then that's where they fall. That's how they fall prey to Sauron's deceptions. Whereas Aragorn, Frodo, Sam, they're all fallible. They're all flawed in some way. And they all say, I don't have all the answers, but I can trust in my friends and my fellowship to help me get there. So I think that's what the learner needs to be open to learning. You know, sometimes I've got students who will say to me, why do I have homework right now? Like, why are you doing this to me? Like, this is torture. Why are you torturing me right now? And I'm like, child, you are in school. I am your teacher. This is your job. Okay. It is literally it. I have a student in my class who goes, "Oh, miss, you're making me read again." I'm like, my child, it is literally in my job description. I'm making you read because it's in my job description. I am an English teacher. Yes, you are going to read in English class. You know, it's what we do. It's what we do. Okay. I'm sorry. What am I going to do? But he, he knows that even though it's hard, he is going to learn something from it. He just has to be willing to open himself to that. And some days students are more receptive than others. You know, I've got, you know, you've every student comes to learning in their own way. And that could be in a physical classroom. That could be a child curled up in a corner reading a book. It could be an adult coming into a new trade and getting a tool in their hand for the first time. You know, learning comes in so many different ways. It doesn't have to be with a book. It can be with an experience. It can be with a hike in the mountains. It can be under the hood of a car. So if you're willing and open to seeing new perspectives and trying things rather than shutting down and saying, nope, this is my way, this is the only way that's going to work, then if you're open to learning, then that's what makes a good learner and what makes someone open to mentorship.
Yeah. It kind of gets me thinking about even with like Gandalf, even though Saruman was, you know, falling off the deep end, so to speak, you know, Gandalf still was like seeking advice from him and, you know, going over to Minas Tirith and trying to like learn, like you were saying. So I think like, you know, being open to wisdom from other people is, I think is part of that too. I don't really, I mean, I was trying to think about that, like, you know, people seeking wisdom in Middle Earth, and I guess in a sense, like people were getting that from Galadriel,
Yeah.
um, in their journey with the Fellowship and all. So I guess there is that an instance of that too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah. I think there's also instances when wisdom can also, a lot of times, especially in the Silmarillion, is unlooked for. You ignore Melian at your peril. Okay. So many times I'm looking at the chapter. I was looking at Baron and Luthien, and um, Baron comes and he's put before with Luthien. He's put before Thingol and Melian, and Thingol is just coming down on Baron and saying, you know, what are you doing here? How dare you? You are not worthy of my daughter. You're not worthy of being here. And Baron gets courage from Melian. She doesn't say a word, and she doesn't have to say a word. But he just looks at her, and that's when he gets that courage. It says his glance also went also to the face of Melian, and it seemed to him that words were put into his mouth. That's when he gets the courage to speak up and say, I'm here. I am the son of this great house, and I can, you know, I am worthy of your daughter. I am worthy, period. And I will go on this quest that you set before me. And later Melian says to Thingol, um, what is it? She says, looking at it, as King Felagund, I just went a little too far, but she warns Thingol that no matter what, he's lost because he's either quote doomed your daughter or yourself. So either way, Thingol by being so proud, he has lost either he's pushed away his daughter and she says, nope, I'm not going to be a part of your family anymore because I love Baron, or he falls to his pride. And so either way, Thingol's in trouble. And Melian is the one who sort of holds everything together. But she does it quietly. And she does it in a way that I think not a lot of people expect. She's kind of the silent one. She says, well, this is what happens, and this is what happens when you don't listen. And I think Galadriel kind of has that too, but it's more of a, this is what has happened, and this is the result because I didn't listen or because I was proud. Because at first she follows Feanor, and she follows her brother into, and her family into Middle Earth. And then it is through that lesson that she realizes, this is all about my pride. This is what I want. I wanted some form of dominion. And now I have to atone for it. So even though she is no longer part of the ban of Valinor, she chooses not to go back until she's tested by the ring once more. Then she is, okay, I've passed the test. I can go back now. I have truly learned humility. So I was looking through the Silmarillion to see, unfortunately, it doesn't say what she specifically learns from Melian during her time in Doriath. All that's really said about her time there is that that's where she's met Celeborn.
There was, I think, maybe a short point where it said like they would talk and like
I think
it
they
was
would
just like
talk and
wisdom was like maybe the only thing that I saw from there. They would, yeah, but there wasn't really.
yeah, there wasn't really many specifics. But it was, I think, a chance for
Yeah.
her to reflect. And I think Melian gave her some of the, like, she does have a moment where she does probe her, where Melian probes Galadriel about what happened at the kinslaying. So it brings, I think it brings Galadriel to this, to really reflect on, my Wi-Fi, apparently.
I think you're still good.
Okay. Can you still see me okay?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. It just says poor Wi-Fi. All right.
Yeah.
So it brings her to reflect on her part of the kinslaying and how she was a part of it, even though Feanor was the one who started it, and it was the sons of Feanor who did a lot of the damage. She still had a part in it. And so she still has to think, how did my pride take a part in this? And so while Melian doesn't push for an answer, she still probes a little bit and gives Galadriel an opportunity to think about how she played her part. And then I think that translated over time to Lothlorien and to helping the Fellowship understand that they all have a part in this story, and that whatever they do, they have to make a decision on how to do it. But she never tells them what to do. She says, here's the consequence if you do this, but here's the consequence if you do this other path. Like, if you go home, Sam, you've made a choice. If you've made a choice to go home, and that's going to affect your master. You made a promise to Frodo to stay. So really, you should be upholding that promise, but you're not bound to stay with Frodo. So I think she gets that little tidbit, the little waves of mentorship kind of work throughout. I wish we had more, and I wish we had more in the Silmarillion about how people like Aule, because you hear about Aule all the time, like this Feanor was a student of Aule. The Noldor were students of Aule. What does that mean to be a student of Aule? Does it mean that, he literally puts a hammer and chisel in your hand? Or does it mean that you follow him and you worship him? Does it mean that he imparts wisdom? Or does it mean that he does what he wants, that he does his own thing and everybody else just kind of watches him do it? Like, what do they get out of that relationship? Is it an example of mentorship, or is it just an example of like passive work, of passivity on Aule's part and then worship on the Noldor's part. It's tough to tell, but that's research for another day.
Yeah. So I was just gonna this one line from Silmarillion with where about Melian and Galadriel. So it's talking about Galadriel here. So
Mm-hmm.
therefore she remained in the hidden kingdom and abode with Melian, and of her learned great lore, wisdom, learned great lore and wisdom concerning
Mm-hmm.
Middle Earth. So
Yeah,
that's
but
pretty
that's it.
basic, but that's it.
It's pretty basic. But I think then, yeah, because she at first Galadriel kind of wants dominion over Middle Earth, so I wonder if that's a moment where I might hypothesize that it's where Galadriel learns more about Middle Earth and what it has to offer for her, and how to become a part of the community of Middle Earth rather than holding dominion over it. But again, there's not much there.
Yeah.
You work with what you have.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks, Elise, for coming on and talking about mentorship and leadership in Middle Earth. Yeah, it's been great. I've enjoyed it. So
Thank you. Thank
yeah,
you for having me, Philip. It's been great.
yeah, and thanks everybody for tuning in. Catch us for our next episode next week.